Okay. All right, Toby. All right, lay low. Yes, you like the kitty cat. Lay low, Toby. Hi, welcome. Sorry, everybody's here. Wants to say hi. All right, Toby, you guys got it. Can you lay low? Come on. And then there's Bruno here too. Maybe I should have kicked them out before we started. No? Oh, okay. Anyways, welcome, Ralph Mork and the 45th Clown. How are you guys doing today? Yes, hello, Toby and Bruno, and this is Spooky. Yes, today's the Toby Show. Oh, no. Oh, okay. Well, anyways, hello. Welcome. All right, you're going to go to Spooky? Oh, good, that's not plugged in. I was going to plug this in before we started, but it is not plugged in. Okay, so welcome. Are you guys getting excited for Halloween? Do you guys even celebrate Halloween where you're at? I definitely am getting into the spirit. I've already gone to one Halloween-themed event, which was quite fun. We had a mummy wrapping contest and used streamers to wrap each other up, and it was hilarious. You know, one of those things you had to be there, but it was fun. I highly recommend. So last week, I had the question of, how do you sew if you don't have a sewing machine? And my answer was a needle and thread, but that's not a full answer. So I decided to use one of these little crappy sewing kits. Use the crappy needle that's inside of it and show you guys basically what the goal is when you are sewing. Yes. Welcome, James Allen. Thank you for coming. So this thing here is a needle threader. If you have poor eyesight, you may need that. Those things are very handy. I appreciate them when I'm in a hurry, especially since I have a little bit of a shake. I have everything but thread. Yeah, I have everything here but thread. That's okay. I have some thread right there. So, Spooky, it's your show. I know, he just looks like a shadow. Hey, Bruno. Okay. Thread. So, yeah. Thread's kind of an important part of sewing. I'm not going to go into great detail of here's these stitches and those stitches because I feel there's a lot of really good tutorials on different hand stitches. But what we're trying to do is do hand sewing and make it look as good as possible. I have burlap to explain the problems that we're dealing with when it comes to hand stitching, how we go about solving them, and that kind of a thing. So if you look at burlap, see these strings that are coming off the edges? That's what happens with woven fabrics. So if you sew the edges, eventually it'll shred till you get to your seam and then it'll fall apart. Now, it's not that dramatic on most fabrics as burlap, but even burlap can be hand sewn or sewn and have a finished edge. Professional things have finished edges, sometimes in a costume. It's a costume. You can also use a lining. There's a lot of place to go around it. But your biggest problem when you sew two pieces of fabric together is it fraying and getting gross. Got my needle, I got my thread. I have to thread that, and you guys are watching, so it's going to take twice as long. So I can't even get it unhooked. Do you guys actually use those little plastic hooks on the thread to keep it from tangling? I do. So when you hand sew, I know the temptation is to get as much as much thread as you possibly can, but you're going to hate your life. I recommend getting one arms pull and a second arms pull because you don't want to pull any more than that. Any more than that, you're going to start getting tangly. In fact, yeah. So just 2 arms pull lengths of thread should be more than enough. You don't want to do more than that. And I say just fold it in half and tie it in a knot at the end. You can do it single thread, you can do it 2 threads, you can even double thread it with 4 threads, which when I'm being really lazy, I do that. But yeah, we're just going to do a double thread, so we're going to thread it through. And how I like to thread my needles is I pinch my thread, look for the little dot, and then I put my eye over the dot of the top of the thread, and it goes really quickly for me. But you can use a needle threader. You can like line it up and try to get it in, but yeah. So 45th Clown says, UK here, so not a lot of events, but Halloween parties do happen. We have a bonfire night in November. Less dressing up. Well, that still sounds like fun. I know, get into the fall festivities. I smell pumpkin spice in the air. It's that season. Ralph Mork says, Halloween is not much of a thing over here, but people decorations every year, so someday it might become officially a holiday. I know, it's in the spirit of things, honestly. Things are getting back to, I don't want to say quote unquote normal, but it's not as crazy. So people are having parties again and we're starting to socialize. When I worked at the costume shop, I usually met people for the first time that when they were going to a Halloween party, they got invited to a Halloween party and they're like, okay, I'm here. It's this theme. I don't know what to do. And then by the time they'd picked out their costume, got all their fun accessories, tried everything on, like they were excited and ready for the party. And when they come back, they're like, oh my gosh, it was such a fun party. Now we're going to have this kind of a dress up party. We're going to do, so they would often have 70s parties afterwards or 20s parties or, some kind of a good themed dress up party or, what were those things where those dinner mystery theaters, but the games, those are also really fun. Like people will be like, I need an excuse to play dress up because it's a lot of fun. And I think Halloween's when people really get to try it first. All right, so we have this really crappy burlap fabric and we have a needle and thread tied at the end. Okay, so to start, you don't really have to worry about having a knot at the end because we're going to take 2 stitches right in the same spot and it's going to lock your thread in place. So when you sew with the sewing machine, you do a back stitch and then you go forward. It's based off of hand stitching. You just stitch 2 stitches in the same place, 3 if you want to make sure that it's definitely tight, but you don't even need to knot it. You just need to do 2 stitches at the beginning, right in the same place. And that's how you lock the beginning of your thread because it's so easy to pull too much through. So that's 1. And hold on, I stabbed my finger. 2. It's pink so you guys can see it. And it's a nice big shot so you guys can see too. But 2 stitches right in the same spot, that's not going to pull out. No matter how hard I pull this, it's not, those stitches are now locked in. Wolverine Scratch, what are you making? I am going to be stitching the cape for the Jane Foster Thor costume, but I wanted to show you kind of what we're dealing with and why we're doing what we're doing. So I wanted to show you arm's length thread, 2 stitches in the place, and then following along your same seam allowance. So I'm going to do this kind of a thicker seam allowance. So I think I'm going to do the 5/8 seam allowance that's typical in patterns. Normally I like to use a 1/2 inch or even down to a 1/4 inch seam allowance because I often use my serger to finish these edges. But sergers are a pain in the butt to figure out, so I don't expect anyone to know how to use those. So you can do a basting stitch or a stab stitch where you go in and out and in and out and in and out, and that is going to hold the fabric together. Okay. Now, a back stitch is going to lock your stitches in place. And when I mean a back stitch is you're going to take a step forward and then 1/2 a step back. Step forward, 1/2 a step back. And so then instead of doing Seriously, I feel like you can look up all these stitches online, but a back stitch is going to be your best friend. You're going to stitch forward, and then so between where I just stitched and where the thread's coming out, I'm going to stitch halfway in between, going back. And then, oops, sorry. Don't worry, we're just live watching me hand sew. It's gonna be fun. So you go that half stitch back, and then you go a stitch forward and go back into the half stitch. And then you'll have a running stitch that's pretty locked in place. It's not going to come undone. And so I like to stick my needle in the halfway point and then just already stitch so it's like one motion instead of a whole bunch of motions. And that's going to give you a stitch that's going to hold everything together pretty solid. Now remember how I told you that we still have the issue of these edges being all frayed? Yeah, these edges are going to be frayed. So when you're working with just a regular cotton fabric, woven, your edges will come undone. There's tighter ones, there's looser ones. The more fine your fabric is, the less likely. No, woven fabrics do it. So a way people get around that is by pinking their edges, making the edges so that they're little triangles. But I don't have a pair of pinking shears. I don't know why I don't. I've had them, but I couldn't find a single pair before we started. But the pinking shears make little points so that if you get one thread, the whole thing doesn't come undone, so that it protects your seams. You can also fold it over. My favorite is a French seam, so after you sew your seam, you press it this way, and then you do a stitch all the way down the other way, and then your edges are completely wrapped and they're not going to be coming undone. So put on a good TV show and just sit and hand stitch. Honestly, it's really therapeutic, very zen. Once you get in the mood, you get going with your hand stitching. You know where you're going, you know what is happening, and you just kind of take your time. Sometimes I will mark on my finger what an inch is, and then have the goal to have a really good, nice, tight stitch is 10 stitches per inch. But that's really not always necessary. You don't have to do it that tight. A lot of cheaper garments, they get away with the longer stitch lengths in general. And when it's for a costume, it's for a costume. But let me just finish this edge. But the real secret to sewing is finishing your edges and pressing. Pressing's not exactly the same as ironing, but it's basically ironing. Pressing means squishing. You're not like smooshing all the fibers around because, all right, when you're done at the end, remember how we locked it at the beginning with 2 stitches? I'm just going to finish it off with 2 stitches at the end so that it doesn't come untangled right in the same spot. You can tie a knot, but it's not necessary. I do out of habit. I just kind of have that motion in my muscle memory, but stitching really doesn't take that long, but taking the time to do the back stitch really locks your hand stitches in place and makes a permanent stitch. If you're just going in and out and in and out, that's a basting stitch and it's not going to be as secure. And if you guys are wondering, stretch fabrics, you want to do exactly that stitch that I did. You don't really have to worry about finishing the edges on knits because they're not going to be coming unwoven. They're not going to fray. So you have a lot of leniency when it comes to stretch fabrics. I love working with them. A lot of people are afraid to work with stretch knits, but they're what I work with on a normal basis and my favorite fabrics to work with. Let me see. You guys have been talking. What am I making? I'm going to be working on the cape. I will show you that in a second. Have you watched the trailer for the new Ant-Man movie? No, I have not. James Allen, you're basically making a spring. I don't know. Welcome, William Colliners. And Wolverine Scout says, Felician, what's up? Costume at me. And then welcome, Schultz Division. So, yes, feel free to ask me any of your Halloween questions. Today we are talking mostly hand stitching and how to get things that you want made when you are don't have a sewing machine, and it's not the end of the world. Hand stitching is a lot faster than you'd think, and it's a lot easier sometimes than trying to get things figured out how you put them in the sewing machine. I know I can just hand stitch it. It's going to go way better. So feel free to ask me any questions. But I told you we were going to work on the cape for the costume. I got a pair of curtains. They were really cheap at the thrift store. They're nice red. I cut off the grommet side of them, and I used the grommets on the costume. I taped them in place. They turned out really nice. But I still had all this fabric left for the cape. It already has a finished edge, so I don't have to worry about those nasty seams coming undone, except for at the top where it's where I cut it. And as you can tell, I have some stitching going on up here. Don't worry. I have another. Oh, this is the wrong end. I have two curtains because one of the biggest problems I find with capes is they're not wide enough. Like, you think you have one panel of fabric and that's going to be wide enough to do Batman. No, Batman is a full circle. Okay, half circle. You can get away with a half circle for Batman. But you need to have the fabric to be able to spread for capes. I agree with what's her face from The Incredibles, Edna. No capes. But if you're going to cape, make sure that it's wide enough. So instead of doing only one panel of curtain, that's really not going to be wide enough for my cape. I'm going to do two, especially since she has the shoulders. So I'm going to do a full panel for each shoulder, and then I'm going to connect them through a back seam in the back. And I don't have to finish the edges because they're curtains that already have finished edges, and I don't have to hem it because they already have a hem. So, but since I want to gather all of this fabric, down to my shoulder width so that it can hang down the back. I stitched it nicely and neatly, and I was going to show you that because it's not too difficult. Wolverine Scratch, is the body armor finished? No, but I got a lot done on it. I got the circles attached. I was kind of waiting on the cape before I finished the collar piece. So it's not done, but I have worked on it. So since my curtains, they have a wide edge finish, I'm going to use this as my guidelines. So I use those to kind of, not as my centers, but I wanted them kind of flat on the edges, and I gathered in between them. So the first thing I did was I cut these down to the length that I needed them. So they're both the same length. And then I'm going to gather it. I'm going to fold it in half, find my centers, and then I'm going to find my centers until I think I did 8s. Let me count. I don't know what I did. I'll just do it all. Let's see. Okay. Yes, Schultz Division, Cape Time. And yeah, I will wear the finished costume on the Oda Makes live stream for our Halloween stream, which will be the 30th, not the 31st. Yeah, so if you want to see that there, that's what I decided to wear. All right, now I'm marking it to the centers, but I am not counting in this edge. I'm counting it from the inside of this edge just because I'm gathering it between the salvage edges, between the edges. between the seam allowance. And then finding my centers again. And I think this is my last one. Okay. Can kind of see how I'm marking the centers, and then I have to mark the centers and I have to mark the centers. But in the end, it should be an evenly distributed pins, and then I'm going to use those for my pleat marks. Okay. 45th Clown says, I learned to sew some stitches from a book last year. Seeing the actual thing being made is really helpful, so thank you. It's just the small tips like the ideal 10 stitches per inch. Yeah, no, I completely get that, because I can look up in a book and I can see those patterns, but why and where do you use them? The back stitch is like the permanent stitch that's I find that I can really get on a roll with and get as fast as I can. The basting stitch I often do to gather, and it works, but there's a couple drawbacks. It starts to gather, it starts to get loose, and anyways. So now I have all my pins in place at the top, and they're evenly spaced, and this is my center one. Now I am going to start taking this pin, so you guys can see it. I'm going to mark with the green pin right where my seam allowance edges, salvage edges, whatever you want to call them. So green pin's not as visible as the yellow pins, but I'm taking the yellow pin and I am folding them all the same direction towards my, so these pins are now friends and I have a pleat, okay? Instead of taking this pin out, I'm just going to add a new pin so it's not undoing anything. And now that's going to be there. Now this next guy, he's going to come over to his friend, and I'm leaving just a pleat. So just a less than 1/4 of an inch, down to 1/8 of an inch, maybe a couple millimeters, but just a little bit of a pleat. And then I'm going to go to this edge and do the same thing, working my way from this side, doing the exact same pleat that I just did over here, taking this friend and meeting him over here. Nope, it goes this way. That's why I didn't just go one direction. I want to make sure that my fullness is going towards the center, okay? You don't want your fullness going to the outside. We want the fullness towards the center. So this pin now meets up with this pin. Oops, that's a needle and thread. And I can pin it together. And then this pin comes over here with all these guys over here. And can mark that with the pin. So I'm getting these little tiny pleats, just a little on both sides. And I'm going to take these pins, mark them in, and then bring them to the center. So this guy's going to come join over with his friend with all the fullness pushed towards the center, leaving about 1/8 of an inch of a pleat showing. And then pin it in place, just so I make sure that I'm doing it all the same way. Let me do the other side, same thing, meet to the edge, give it a little bit of a pleat, and then pin it in place. And now we have that one last pin. What do we do? Well, it needs to go to both sides. So I just did a little bit of a 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch that you wanted to show. I marked it with the pin so that there's that little bit of a pleat that's going to be on top. And then both of these get pinned to that pin, to the white pin, not the yellow pin. And why they white pin? Because it just gives you breathing room to have that center pleat that I want. I will show you in just a second. Hopefully that made sense. It may be a little more confusing than anything. Okay, get a pin in there. Oops, that wasn't it. It's right here. So many pins. Center, that's from this side, and Wolverine scratch. More pins than Hellraiser. Yes, there are. Now for each of these pins, we're just going to replace it with a stitch. But it's all pleated. Whoops, I'll put you back. Right here. So it's all pleated right in here. And my goal is to have this when I'm finished. So it's a lot of dividing it in half and in half and in half and then meeting towards the center. Let me just make sure that this center point goes to right. Okay. I used up most of my thread, so I'm going to rethread my needle and thread. And I'm just going to double thread it. Because it's such a heavy fabric, I could do the extra thread in there, but it's really not necessary. It's a lot easier than you think. So I just showed you a back stitch. You can do the back stitch, but this application, it's perfectly acceptable to do a stab stitch. And a stab stitch is the pointy end goes in and then it comes back out. So it's the most basic concept of stitching. We don't typically do this because it takes a lot more effort and energy, but we are stapling or pinning all of this together. So I had all my fullness go towards the center, but then once we're in the center, I folded it all back towards the edge. So I have one pleat in the center. You can see that on this one when it's done. Okay. And you can see that my stitches just were in and out and in and out. I have one stitch for each of my pins that I had, except for I took out my marker pins when I was doing that one just because I didn't really need them, but I'd rather have more pins in than not because they hold it together. And starting at the end, I'm just going to do 2 stitches right in place just to get started. That's 1 stitch. And 2 stitches. Now I'm just going to stab stitch, stab to the back, to the front. Make sure that I hit everywhere that there is a pin, but I'm doing more than I need on the edges because I don't have pins there. Stab stitch in, stab stitch out. Sometimes it's a little hard to see where you're coming in from the back. It's okay to stab multiple times before you commit to where your stitch is. I know sometimes you can kind of get ahead of yourself and then get all tangled. It happens to the best of us. Just as I'm stitching, I'm going to take out my pins so that I know they're holding. And no surprises like, oh, I missed one. This guy. Thank you, Schultz Division. Remember to leave a like on the stream. Yes. So, almost there. I'm to the halfway point. I want to keep this stupid pleat. It kind of holds everything together. I like the center pleat. Thank you, Just Local. I thought pink would really show up. It's not popping as much as the white did. But that's what I'm doing right now. Honestly, it is because it's a red. If you want to hide your stitches, use one shade darker thread than what your fabric is. You would think that, oh, I should go like a shade lighter. No, shade lighter pops, like white pops on black. I would always go a shade darker. And if I only had white or black to sew with, if it's a light fabric, I'll go with white. But if it's a dark fabric, I'll go with black. Yeah. So just stab stitches. And you know, staples work too. Okay, I know I'm giving a lot of these really bad advice, like I say, duct tape and staples and things like that. But they're not half bad ideas and options. One of the first really big projects that I was working on with Odin specifically, it was a Smosh episode, Every Superhero Ever, or something like that. It was one where I had a ton of superhero costumes that I had to source. I had limited budget. I had limited time. I think I only had a week to get all these costumes together. And it was a bunch of different costumes and a bunch of different scenes and a bunch of different people and weird practical effects that had to happen because one of the costumes needed to, it needed to like come off and then they were going to play it backwards so it like looked like he suited up. So it was like one of those practical things that I had to figure out with magnets. Building everything from scratch. Anyways, it was like one of those things that nobody understood why I was like so stressed, but Odin did, and he let me borrow superhero face mask and a few other things that really helped me get through that project. But yeah, that's the first time I used Warblood. That stuff's expensive. It's great. It's terrible for things. It's great for other things. I used that to sculpt what the lady was supposed to wear, where it was like covers nothing, but look at your armor, and it was. I love the way it turned out. It was hilarious. But yeah, that was one of those things where it's like I had so many costumes that I had to do, and they needed to look at least halfway decent. And you know what? You do what you got to do to get it done because, yeah. But hand stitching isn't the worst. And now, just at the end, 2 stitches right in place. And I like to knot it just because I have that stuck in my head, but it's not necessary. Take out those last stitches. And now I have my gathers for my cape. On either side. This side down. And then I want it to be separated for about 5 or 6 inches down the spine and then come together. I want to make sure my pleats are up on the same side. Okay. So I'm going to take my fabrics, my capes left and right, and put them right sides together so that this finished seam, this one right, y'all, my finished edge, right sides together, starting at the top. I'm going to measure down 5 or 6 inches. Hold on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to go full 6 right there. Now, because I have such a thick seam allowance, I'm just going to follow this line right here. I'm going to show you guys kind of this hand stitching technique that I did on this piece and show you how it looks in practical application. And then I'm going to show you my stitching from the other side. So if you don't have access to the inside of your sewing project and your top sewing, I'll show you how to do that to get the same pretty seam. So look at that thread's not going to be, you guys can't see that, is not going to be long enough. I keep doing short threads because you don't want to get it longer than you're comfortable pulling it through. Because trust me, it's not worth it. Here's a technique I'm going to tell you guys, but shh, don't tell, because it's kind of gross. But it was taught to me by my best friend's grandma. She was a seamstress in Japan around World War II because her grandparents met. He was in the army, and she was in Japan, and she used to sew as her profession. And one of the things that she taught me is nose grease. And if you're hand sewing anything, it's going to make a night and day difference. Because what's the worst part about hand sewing is when the needle doesn't want to go through the fabric and your fingers start to get really sore. That's why you have thimbles to help push it through, especially if it's a thicker or a fur or a leather or, you know, one of those more dense fabrics. And even just regular fabric going through it, it's going to it's going to get a little bit tougher to stab your needle through. But if you just rub your needle along the side of your nose where you're nice and oily, then your needle just goes through because you lubricated it. You can also go through your hair, just a couple little, and then all of a sudden it just goes so much easier. Like if I recommend waxing your thread, or Thread Heaven, which is a synthetic wax. I love that stuff even more than beeswax. It's called Thread Heaven. It's a little blue container. I have that on my sewing machine, so it conditions my thread as it goes through the sewing machine. Because I use such weird materials on a normal basis all the time, it really does help condition the thread so that it sews a lot smoother. But also oiling your needle. It doesn't need like real oil, because you don't want to like use real oil, because then you'll get oil in your fabric. But the natural oils in your skin aren't going to really show up like while you're sewing, but it's going to make it a lot easier to hand sew. So I am going to show you this, and then you guys have, well, Toby's itchy. Hi, Toby. Come here. Okay. Did that slightly longer, but it's okay. Hi, Toby. I'm going to show you guys this, and then I've done a half an hour, so I've done the stream long enough, because that's always my goal. Just do a half an hour talking at you guys, and then after that, I'm done. So it's been about a half an hour. I'm going to finish showing you guys this hand stitching stuff. Do you guys have any questions about your costumes? Feel free to ask. And yeah. Okay. So I did not the end. Running this through the sewing machine is going to go a lot faster, just because the nature of driving a car versus walking, but it's not the end of the world. So since I have such a thick seam allowance, I don't want it to start at that seam allowance and have it fold in and be kind of weird. So I'm going to start at the edge and then gradually make it to my seam allowance, just with a gentle slope of your triangle. Make it to the thing, and then we'll be following that harsher line because it's going to press so much nicer on that line. Um, Let me reinforce the tip. You do the stitch, lock your stitches in at the very tip because it's going to give you a clean edge. Two stitches. Oh, look at that. My thread's already tangled. It's okay. Thread wax really helps with hand stitching. If you're finding yourself like frustrated, going, why is it tangling? Why is it like so hard to stab this through? Wax your threads. So we are going to do back stitches. So I'm stabbing it towards my original stitch, and then I'm going to pull it through, and I'm going to stab a little further and halfway back. So for every step forward, you take one step back. So 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Yes, you can get longer stitches that way because you're locking your stitches. So it's not going to take you quite as long. You know what? I'm so used to just matching my edges up. Smart people, they pin their seams before they start sewing them. That way they know they end up together. I just know the rules that I'm breaking, but your life will be a lot easier if you match it, your ends up before you start sewing all the way down to the end because you don't want to go, oh, they don't line up. It's happened way too often. So pins are your friends. Welcome, Dan Does Junk. All right, let me just pin this real quick. I'm not going to stitch this whole seam on this stream. That's going to be way too boring. I feel like hand stitching is boring enough as it is, but it gets the job done. These things need to connect and it needs to not fall apart and it needs to look halfway decent. Yeah. I'm really glad I did that because I could have easily ended up at least an inch off if I didn't. So pins are your friend. Let me plug this iron in real quick. All right, that's going to get really hot really fast. But the secret to good sewing is actually just good ironing. You'd think that it's not, but if you want things to look impressive, you press it. And yeah. So other things you can do without having to fully hand stitch everything, you can use Stitch Witchery for your edges. Stitch Witchery is basically fusible, not woven tape that you just iron. So it glues it together using heat. It's like hot glue tape that you activate with an iron, which is really great for hems, but it gets gummy. I don't like sewing through it. It has its applications, but I don't even, okay, I lied. I do own some right now. I don't know where it is, but it's not the best. It's not the worst. It is an option. So see how I took my gentle slope to my seam allowance? I know you can't really see my seam allowance, but it looks like it's a straight line because I did all those back stitches. Now I'm going to go straight down along the, hold on one second. Dan Does Junk, guess what? You get to be a moderator. But now I'm going to follow along this seam allowance. edge that's already finished on my curtain and take it all the way down till I run out of this thread. Uh-oh. And sewing with the back stitch really does help it from gathering. If you're just doing an in and out or a stab stitch, it will it'll gather. It'll get all wrinkly. But doing it step back, step back, step back really locks it in place. One side looks like you can see the steps, and the other side you see the lines. So let me just take a couple more stitches, finish this up, and then I will show you guys how to do it from the outside. Thank you, Dan. I appreciate you. Yeah. So let me stitch that in place. 2 stitches to finish it, to lock my stitches in place. And I'm just going to knot it. Yeah. Hand stitching, there's a little tiny hole in your fabric. Using the right color thread, you can fix it. You can get really fine details. You can get really big details. Knowing the basics of it can help you get out of a lot of situations. I use safety pins all the time because, you know, it really does help with this replacing stitches, but a needle and thread can do a lot better repairs. Oh yeah, I have to show you guys this. This does not go in your eyes. See, it says do not put in your eyes. All right, I am going to press what I've sewn so far so you guys can see what's going on. I'm going to press it flat, and then I'm going to press it open. And I say press and not iron because you don't want to wiggle everything around. You want to just squish and squish and squish. Because if you start pressing and ironing things around, you're going to start pulling the fibers and then warping them and then heat pressing them into that warp position, and it's going to be funky. So just smoosh it. So little wiggle, not going to kill it, but that's what your ultimate goal is to just squish it. Steam's your friend. I did not load this up with steam because I'm lazy. So now, just going to press it open. Maybe not to that point. Okay. With it pressed, it looks nice and clean, and see my slope from where they started to where they go. You can't really, can you? It blends nice. So now let's say we want to sew the seam. I didn't sew the whole seam, you can see that. But let's say we want to sew this together and we only have access from the outside of our seam. So it's going to look like this together. But it's not sewn together. Let me, oh, I lost my needle completely. It's okay, I have a mini sewing kit and it has one more in it. Oh, I see it. I put it away, who would have thought? Okay. So there's a little bit of a back stitch that goes side to side. If you look at it, hold on, let me see it. Okay, these are our 2 pieces of fabric that we're trying to join together. I'm gonna stitch here, stitch here. I'm not going to draw this diagram. What we're going to do is we're going to do a back stitch on one side and a back stitch on the other side, a back stitch on one side and a back stitch on the other side as we go in that direction. Okay? So back stitch, back stitch, back stitch, back stitch. And that's going to lock your stitches in place from the outside. And we're going to go from one edge to the other edge. I'll show you in just a second. Let me thread this real quick. Oh my goodness, it's almost been an hour. Okay, let me wrap this up then. But I do want to show you this because this may save your butt. Okay. Pop seam. Those are my stitches. This is it. Now fabric's going to want to fold on grain because you have a bunch of lines and they want to naturally follow these lines. It just kind of naturally wants to happen. So it's not that hard to keep a folded edge and especially staying on the same folded edge. So if I'm sewing these two folded edges together, it kind of wants to stay in this position, especially if you pin it as you go. So I'm going to hold it as if it's already sewn together. I'm going to start with my thread on the back so you don't see it and stitch it in place 2 times. I didn't knot it, so we're just going to go 1, 2. And then I'm going to push my needle to the outside edge. Now, we're sewing this seam from the outside and not from the inside. Again, it's not sewn together. It's just folded together. You can take this needle and pick up, I can't see what I'm doing, pick up a pinch on this side of the thread, and then you're going to pick up a stitch on that side. Now you can wiggle it back and forth between the two. Edges and get it on your needle. So you just wiggled it between the two sides going back and forth. Now, if in a quick pinch, like if you are if you are fixing a split in a pair of pants, that's completely valid and it works. See? That works too. Now, when I was telling you take a back stitch, take a back stitch, take a back stitch, you can also do that for a better locked in stitch that's not going to and you go from side to side. Actually, sometimes I find pushing it the wrong way. When I was doing the cosplay repair last SAC anime, Loki had one of his jacket popped a seam right at an intricate corner, and we couldn't get on the inside of the thing to fix it. And I was fixing it while he was still wearing it, and it was like right at this bicep line. And so I just followed the holes that were already in the vinyl, because leather and vinyl, they're going to, if you stab a hole in them, they're going to keep that hole forever. Most fabrics, if you stab a hole in it, it's going to disappear because it's most of the time going between the fibers anyways, and then you go like this and then the hole's gone. So you don't really have to worry about stabbing woven fabrics or knit fabrics, but vinyls and leathers, those holes are gonna be there forever, and you have to know that before you stab a hole in it. Don't use safety pins, use magnets, to put, tags and stuff like that on leather or vinyl. But anyways, this way is taking a whole lot longer, but going back and going back, and I did it right on the edge so what you guys can really see what I did, because you try and do it on the inside edge, but I did it right at the top edge, and then when you press it, it will disappear. But those are like 3 hand sewing techniques that you guys can get away with to really whip things together. Doing the basting stitch, you can do the back stitch, and then you can do the back stitch between the pop seam. So, Austin Lips, we got 7 days till Halloween. Have a nice day today, Felicia. Yes, I know. I have a kimono I have to do. It's very specific character, the pink, the everything. So I feel the time crunch, definitely. Trash Panda, so glad to manage to catch another stream. Stupid time zone. Well, welcome, Trash Panda. I know you're in Australia. Australia, that's awesome. Dan does junks. Do you know if Odin's next stream will be the usual time or not? Yes. So Odin's next stream is going to be on October 30th, same time. It's from noon to 2, unless you are a one of Odin's Patreon members, and then we start 45 minutes early for them. But it's going to be the same time, same place, but it's going to be on Sunday instead of Monday because life. But we're going to be there. I'm going to be watching them eat spicy things, and I'm going to be dressed up, hopefully in this costume. Yes, I know foam is probably the superior material to make costumes out of. I really do believe it. But working at a costume shop and seeing all the sins happen, things hot glued that shouldn't be hot glued, the wrong way to do chainmail, the right way to do chainmail. In the end, it's did you have fun at the party? So I feel like Halloween's a great place to start playing dress up with your friends and family, and then continuing that when you into cosplay, into parties, into other things. But yeah, so I wanted to show you, it's all the way over there, but I did get a little progress done on the cardboard bodice, and I did stitch that together. I used a sewing machine to sew that. It's sticking things together. I now have, this is the wrong side, a Thor cape that I think is going to be really cool. And yep, I'm jabbering on now at this point, so no more questions. I will say goodbye. Bruno, do you want to come say goodbye? No, he's passed out. Toby can say goodbye. Hey, Toby, high five. Like it how. I hope you understood me rambling on, got something from it. Fray check is great to keep things from falling apart or finishing your edges. But yeah, thank you for joining me, and I will see you guys next week. Hi, Toby. Yeah. Next Sunday, I will be on Odin Makes Streams live, so I'll see you guys later. Bye. And